Have you ever written a sweet romance where your hero and heroine have chemistry, they enjoy spending time together, they have many conversations, and maybe there's a wonderful meet cute? There are lingering looks and vulnerable moments, and maybe even that long-awaited first kiss. But somehow, perhaps the story still feels a little flat or boring. You might think that you need a bigger conflict, more dramatic breakup, a villain, a secret, or some huge external problem. But that might not be what your story is missing at all. Your hero and heroine might simply need something meaningful to lose. Because readers don't keep turning pages just because they're wondering, will these two people fall in love? Readers are also wondering, what will it cost them to choose love? And what might they lose if they're too afraid to choose love? And that's what we're going to talk about today. In case we haven't met, I'm Lorna Faith, and on this YouTube channel, we talk about simple, practical ways to write emotionally satisfying fiction stories without making the writing process complicated or overwhelming. And today we're talking about one of my favorite parts of writing a Hallmark-style sweet romance, which is emotional stakes. Because you don't need explicit scenes or endless misunderstanding between your main characters to keep readers interested in reading your sweet romance. All you need is two characters who desperately want something and who are afraid of losing something, and who eventually discover that falling in love requires them to risk the very thing that they've been trying the hardest to protect. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 5 ways that you can raise the emotional stakes between your hero and your heroine. And throughout the video, I'll show you examples from Jack and Emily's story, my fictional sweet romance story that is set in the seaside town of Angels Cove. And if you're not sure where to begin your story, or your plot or characters feel overwhelming, join my course for beginning sweet romance writers and write your Hallmark-style sweet romance with a simple roadmap. You can find the link below this video. Though, let's talk about 5 ways to raise the emotional stakes between your hero and your heroine. Grab your notebook and let's start with the most important question. First step, ask this question. What does your character have to lose? Before you start adding more conflict to your sweet romance, ask this question. What does my character believe they could lose by falling in love? Notice that I'm not asking what they could physically lose. I'm asking what they believe they could lose emotionally. Maybe your heroine believes that she could lose her independence, her sense of security, the life that she's carefully rebuilt, her relationship with her family, her dream, her reputation, her child's stability, or the emotional walls that have kept her safe. Your hero might believe that he could lose control, freedom, the respect of someone he loves, his carefully ordered life, his identity, his family legacy, or his ability to protect the people that he cares about. And here's where things really become interesting. Sometimes the thing that your character is protecting is actually helping them. It's simply making them feel safe. For example, in my story example of Jack and Emily, Jack is a former Navy SEAL who has experienced devastating loss. Deep inside, Jack carries the belief, people I love get hurt because of me. So Jack's emotional strategy becomes, don't get too close to people. He believes that if he doesn't deeply love someone, he doesn't have to experience the terror of losing them. And he doesn't have to wonder whether their loss was somehow his fault. Then Emily arrives in Angels Cove. Emily has her own emotional wound. People she depended on in her life have disappeared from her life. Her father left when she was a little girl. Later, her husband died. And now she is raising her young girl, Sarah, while trying to create a new life. Emily's emotional belief is, people that I love will eventually leave. So notice what happens when these two characters meet. Jack thinks, if I love you, I might hurt you. Emily thinks, if I love you, you might leave me. And suddenly this sweet romance has very real stakes, because falling in love threatens both of their emotional survival strategies. Step number 2, connect what they could lose to their deepest fear. This is where emotional stakes become much stronger. Try not to randomly choose something for your character to lose. Instead, connect it to their wound, fear, misbelief, or core need. Here's a simple chain of events that you can use. Past wound leads into misbelief, which leads into fear, which leads into something to lose. Let's use Emily as our example. Her past wound is abandonment and loss. That creates the misbelief. She believes that people I love eventually leave. And that creates the fear that says, if I depend on someone again, I'll be abandoned again. And this is what creates the emotional stake, which says, if Emily gives Jack her heart, she could lose the security that she has fought so hard to rebuild. Now let's talk about Jack. Jack's past losses have created guilt and fear. His misbelief becomes, I'm dangerous to the people that I love. His fear becomes, if I let someone close, I'll fail to protect them. And therefore, Jack's emotional stake becomes, if Jack loses Emily, he has to risk becoming responsible for people he could lose. And remember that Emily doesn't come alone. She has her little girl, Sarah. So for Jack, he's not simply considering falling in love with one person. He's becoming attached to a mother and her little girl. And that's much more frightening for him. And this is one of the reasons that emotional stakes work so beautifully in sweet romance. You don't necessarily need something enormous to happen. A quiet scene can carry tremendous emotional weight. Imagine Jack helping little Sarah fix something that's broken. Maybe Sarah looks up at Jack and says, will you come back tomorrow? And that's an incredibly simple question, but for Jack, it hits directly against his deepest fear, because suddenly he isn't simply the man helping Emily's daughter. He's become someone that little Sarah expects to stay. And that's emotional stakes. Step number 3, give them something to lose if the sweet romance fails. Now we need to look at the opposite side, because your main characters shouldn't only be afraid of falling in love. Eventually, they should also have something to lose by walking away from love. And this creates one of my favorite dynamics in a sweet romance. Staying feels dangerous, but leaving, on the other hand, begins to feel even more painful. Early in your story, the heroine might think, I can't risk loving him. But later, perhaps she begins to think, I can't imagine my life without him. And that's really a huge emotional shift. And you want to build that shift gradually. For Emily, Angels Cove has become her home. Now she has Aunt Dottie. She has the coffee shop. She begins to form friendships. And Sarah begins to feel safe again. And Jack becomes part of their everyday life. Perhaps he stops by for coffee early in the morning. Maybe Sarah starts saving him a seat. Maybe Emily realizes that she automatically looks towards the door around the time that Jack usually arrives. These are tiny details, but they're doing something important. They're increasing what Emily has to lose. At the beginning, walking away from Jack might have been easy. But halfway through the story, walking away means losing his friendship, his presence, the person that she has begun to trust, the man that her daughter adores, and perhaps the first person who has made Emily imagine a future she thought she never could have again. Now, Jack has the same problem. At first, he can tell himself, Emily is just someone that I'm helping. But slowly, Emily becomes part of his life. He starts to notice when she isn't around. He starts caring for little Sarah. He begins to look forward to mornings at the coffee shop. He begins to tell Emily things he doesn't tell anyone else. Now Jack has something to lose too. And this leads to a powerful question that you can ask when you are plotting your sweet romance. What does my character have in chapter 15 that they didn't have in chapter 1? Maybe it's belonging, trust, hope, family, friendship, or even purpose. Or perhaps finally they have someone who truly understands them and a dream that they can now share. And that's really what makes the second half of your sweet romance emotionally powerful, because now there's more to lose. Step number 4, let the external plot threaten the internal need. This is one of the best ways to make your sweet romance plot feel deeper. Your external conflict shouldn't feel completely separate from your character's emotional journey. Whenever possible, let the physical events of the plot put pressure on the emotional wound. Let's go back to our story example from Jack and Emily. Jack's fear is, I can't protect the people that I love. So what kind of external events would put pressure on that fear? We're not looking for random external events, but it needs to be events where someone Jack cares about could be in danger. Maybe Emily becomes connected to a mystery surrounding Jack's history. Maybe someone begins to threaten Emily. Maybe Jack discovers information that makes him believe that Emily and Sarah could be safer without him. Now the external conflict is pushing directly against Jack's internal conflict. Jack doesn't simply think there's danger. He thinks this is happening because Emily got too close to me. And suddenly his old belief feels true again. People I love get hurt because of me. And so what does Jack want to do? He wants to pull away. He wants to protect Emily. He wants to create distance between them. Possibly, Jack might even convince himself that leaving Emily is an act of love. But what does Emily experience? Let's go back to what her wound is. People that I love leave. So when Jack distances himself in an attempt to protect her, he unintentionally confirms Emily's deepest fear. This is where your external and internal stakes collide. Jack thinks, if I stay, Emily will get hurt. Emily thinks, if I trust him, he'll leave. And your reader is thinking, please don't let your fears destroy the very thing that both of you need. And that's the kind of emotional tension that keeps romance readers turning the pages. Step number 5, escalate the stakes as love deepens between your hero and heroine. One mistake beginning writers sometimes make, and I made the same mistakes too, is creating emotional stakes at the beginning and keeping them exactly the same throughout the entire book. Instead, think of emotional stakes as a staircase. Every few chapters, your characters climb another step. At first, they enjoy each other's company. Then, they trust each other. Then, they reveal something very vulnerable. Then, they begin depending on each other. Then, they start imagining a future together. And eventually, they realize that losing this relationship would genuinely break their hearts. So your stakes in your story might progress like this. Stage 1, curiosity. I like this person, so there's not much to lose yet. Stage 2, connection. I enjoy being around this person. Now there's a little more to lose. Stage 3, trust. I told this person something that I don't tell anyone. Now losing each other begins to hurt just a little more. Stage 4, belonging. This person has become part of my life. Now the relationship has roots. Stage 5, hope. I can imagine a future with this person. And this is where the emotional stakes become very high, because your character is no longer simply risking a relationship. They're risking the future they allowed themselves to hope for. Imagine Emily sitting outside the coffee shop one evening. Jack and Sarah are nearby. Sarah is laughing at something that Jack said, and Emily suddenly pictures something she hasn't allowed herself to picture for a long time: a family. Not necessarily marriage yet, just Jack being there tomorrow, and perhaps next Christmas, and next summer, and years from now. And instead of that thought making Emily really happy, the thought really terrifies her. Because now she has something enormous to lose, and that is hope. Step number 6: make the crisis attack their old belief. As you move toward the crisis in your sweet romance, you want the emotional pressure to become strong enough that your hero and your heroine are forced to make a choice. Will they continue believing their old fears, or will they risk living according to something new? This is why the crisis shouldn't just be they had a fight. The deeper crisis is their circumstances appear to prove that their misbelief is true. For Jack, something happens that makes him think, see, I was right. People are safer without me. For Emily, Jack pulls away, and then Emily begins to think, see, I was right. Everyone eventually leaves. And for both of them, their worst fears seem confirmed. And that's why the separation hurts. It's not because of a simple misunderstanding, but because both characters are confronting the emotional beliefs that they've carried through the entire story. And this is where you can ask another important plotting question. What event would tempt my hero or heroine to return to who they were at the beginning of the book? Jack could become the isolated loner again. Emily could decide that she doesn't need anyone. Both choices would feel safe, but neither choice would represent growth. Which brings us to the very important emotional stake of all. Step 7. Give them something to lose if they refuse to change. Sometimes we focus so much on what characters risk by falling in love that we forget the other side. What do they lose if they don't change? And this is incredibly important, because Jack's choice isn't simply Emily or no Emily, it's fear or connection. Emily's choice isn't simply Jack or no Jack, it's self-protection or trust. If Jack refuses to change, he may keep himself safe from future grief, but he'll also remain alone. If Emily refuses to change, she may protect herself from abandonment, but she'll also prevent herself from experiencing the belonging that she longs for. Suddenly, your happily ever after means much more than the hero and heroine end up together. It means they become brave enough to stop allowing their past wounds to determine their future. And that's why the final choice that your hero and your heroine make is so important. Step 8. Let choosing love cost your hero and heroine something. When your characters finally choose love, don't make it emotionally easy. The happily ever after feels more satisfying when choosing love requires courage. Jack doesn't suddenly become certain that he'll never lose someone again. He can't guarantee that. Instead, his growth might be realizing that loving someone always involves risk, but fear doesn't get to decide who I love. Emily doesn't receive a guarantee that nobody will ever leave her. Instead, Emily realizes, I can choose trust even though I've experienced loss before. And that's really character growth. And that's where your romantic climax becomes much more powerful. Imagine Jack returning to Emily after pulling away. He isn't simply saying, I love you. He's saying in one way or another, I've spent years believing that the safest thing that I could do for people was to stay away from them. But I was wrong. I want a life with you and Sarah, and I'm willing to risk my heart for it. And Emily has a choice too. She can protect herself, or she can trust Jack. Her yes means something because we've spent the entire book watching her struggle with the fear of being left behind again. And that's really what makes the happily ever after feel earned. So here's a simple emotional stakes exercise. Before you write your next chapter, take out a piece of paper and answer these 5 questions for both your heroine and your hero. Question 1. What does this character want emotionally? Maybe belonging, security, acceptance, family, freedom, forgiveness, connection. Question 2. What are they afraid of losing? What have they worked so hard to protect? Question number 3. Why does falling in love threaten that? Connect the romance directly to their fear. Question 4. What do they gain as the relationship deepens? Trust, belonging, hope, a sense of home, a future? Question 5. What will each of your characters lose if they allow fear to win? And this is the question that can unlock your climax of your story. Because by the end of your story, your characters should realize avoiding love has a cost too. So here's some final thoughts. If your sweet romance feels like something is missing, don't immediately add more plot, and don't automatically add another misunderstanding. And don't assume that you need a bigger villain. Instead, look at your hero and your heroine and ask, what do they have to lose? Connect those stakes to their deepest emotional wounds. Give them more to lose as their connection deepens between each other. And let your external events put pressure on their internal fears. Make the crisis tempt them to retreat into their old beliefs. And finally, show your hero and your heroine choosing love, even though choosing love still involves risk. Because your hero and heroine don't need to become fearless, they need to decide that love matters more than the fear that's been controlling them. And when you build your sweet romance that way, your happily ever after becomes more than simply getting the couple together. It becomes the emotional payoff to everything your characters have fought for during the story. Here's a simple writing challenge. Take your hero and heroine and finish this sentence for each of them. If I fall in love with this person, I'm afraid I'll lose blank. Then finish a second sentence. But if I walk away from this person, I might lose blank. Those 2 answers might reveal the emotional heart of your entire romance. And remember, your sweet romance becomes much more powerful when falling in love isn't the only thing at stake. Give your hero and heroine something meaningful to lose, and then make them brave enough to risk it for love. If you're ready to learn why your hero and your heroine need more than a love story, watch this video next. I'll see you there.